Hello, world, and welcome to Tales from Hollywoodland, a veritable feast of movies, Broadway, showbiz stories, news and gossip, with Julian Schlossberg, Arthur E. Friedman, and Stephen J. Rubin. Today's topic is sports movies that we loved. And now, here's Julian, Arthur, and Steve.
Can we just have a big cheer now, like, go Cubbies go? Would that be nice? The first question I have for my three esteemed partners is, what's the first sports-themed movie you remember seeing as a kid? And we'll start alphabetically with Arthur.
Wow. I think probably the first sports movie with a theme movie I ever saw was probably the Babe Ruth story with William Bendix, which would also rate in my book as one of the worst movies ever made. But it was so bad, it was good. It was so bad, it was good. There's a scene in this movie where Babe Ruth, William Bendix, which just was not really Babe Ruth, but in batting practice, hits a ball, and some little kid has his little puppy dog with him, and the ball hits the dog, and Babe Ruth goes running to the kid with the dog, picks up the dog, and the next scene you see him running in with full uniform and his spikes into the hospital with the dog and a little kid. I mean, not to be believed, but it was a fun movie, but Sheepers, looking at it in retrospect, it was not a very good film. Well, it was fun, but that's the first thing I can ever remember seeing.
I mean, for the listeners who've never heard of William Bendix, we grew up with him on a TV series called The Life of Riley, and he was a perfect Riley.
You remember the last line of every show?
No.
He would say, what a revolting development this is.
Bendix was a great character actor. I have to tell you, an old timer told me a great story that during World War II, they all lived in Hancock Park, and William Bendix lived there, and Gene Lockhart lived there, the old actor. And Bendix and Lockhart were the air raid wardens in Hancock Park. So every time there was an air raid, they'd go marching up and down the street with their rifles on their arms and a helmet on. And, they're the two movie stars. William
That's
Bendix.
Funny. I don't generally think of LA having that many air raids, but I know every Friday when I grew up in the 50s, they would do the tests for the air raid sirens. And of course, in that Steven Spielberg movie, 1941, they kind of, in a comedic way, dramatized the night when indeed anti-aircraft fire sounded over LA because they thought it was a Japanese air attack.
Oh, well.
Julian, what is your choice?
I was 9 years old, and my dad took me to see Jim Thorpe, All-American. And it starred Burt Lancaster. I couldn't believe how emotional I got when things went bad for Burt Lancaster as Jim Thorpe. And I was so overwhelmed with his physicality, Lancaster. He's at the height of his game. He's about 36 years old. And he's in great shape. He had been a circus performer, a lot of us know that, and a trapeze artist as well. He even made the movie Trapeze. But in this movie, he's able to show that Thorpe became a professional baseball player, a professional football player. Whatever he did, he excelled in. And in 1912, Thorpe had won the Olympics with the pentathlon and the decathlon and gold medals, which, by the way, I don't think anyone's ever done since. I think that was a record. And then they stripped him of it, even though it was ridiculous, since they stripped him of it because he was supposed to be an amateur. He was an amateur, but had played baseball for $2 a game. So one could understand that you could take away a baseball Olympic, but why would they take away a track Olympic? Anyhow, whatever the reason, he lost that. He was a Native American, not a Native American, a Native Canadian. He was from Canada. And Angelina Jolie announced that she was going to make a movie about him, but it never happened. But recently, a wonderful Mohawk documentary lady named Tracy Deer, Deer, has announced that she's going to make the movie of Jim Thorpe, and the authentic one, because obviously in 1951, Hollywood was certainly cleaning things up about people's biographies, as we know from Arthur's story of Babe Ruth.
Well, Jim Thorpe is clearly in the conversation of the greatest athlete, all-around athlete who ever lived. And that's, I think, what was part of the movie. He was incredible. No basketball, but, at that time, I don't think.
I guess at the beginning of the movie, they have a tribute to him where he was declared by the Sports Writers of America the greatest American athlete of the first half century of the 20th century.
Yeah.
But I read into this movie a little bit because it's one of my favorites, Julian. I particularly love Max Steiner's music, and Max Steiner always added great music to Warner Brothers titles. And it said that the movie had very little to do with reality. They changed almost everything. They gave him one wife and one child he lost, but in reality, he had 7 other children. So apparently there are a lot of Jim Thorpe progeny running around, or at least progeny of progeny. But that was a big, entertaining movie, and it still plays to this day.
And amazingly so, it made money as far as box office, which was great too. Lancaster, as I said, was a dream in that movie physically, just incredible, and he always turned in an interesting performance. I remember Ed Asner, who was the president of SAG, once said something to the effect that Burt Lancaster was a liberal with balls.
Yes.
He also was very friendly to me because I stood in the back of the lobby when he came out of the New Art Theater in West LA one day after showing The Killers and talking a little bit about it. And he wouldn't sign any autographs. But I stood in the back holding up a poster from The Professionals, which is one of my favorite movies of all time. And he came over and slashed his name across it. And I'll never forget that moment.
Well, I've got a little Burt Lancaster story that I don't think I can tell the whole thing, but I was United Arts branch manager in the late 60s, 1970, thereabout. And we had a movie called Valdez is Coming, a movie I happen to like a lot. And Burt Lancaster came up to do press for New England, which simply meant there was a press luncheon, and everybody from the various Maine, New Hampshire, Vermont, Rhode Island, Boston area would come in and have lunch with him, and he would answer all kinds of questions. Great guy. I can't tell the other part of the story. I'm sorry to leave you hanging, but I just can't. I won't allow myself to do it.
Well, why don't you save it for the sex show we're going to do?
Yes, hello. That's probably the case. But I did. He asked me to meet him for breakfast. He was staying at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel, and we had this luncheon thing, and it went on. He was going to take a flight out the next day. So he said, "Why don't you meet me for breakfast tomorrow morning?" I did. And then we walked down Newbury Street. If you're familiar with Boston, Newbury Street would be kind of like Madison Avenue in New York. Rodeo Drive in LA. And there I am walking with Burt Lancaster, vintage 1970. And the similar thing that happened with Bill Holden in New York, people were doing double takes, but you hear, it's Tony Curtis, it's Kirk Douglas. So movies, people, we take it for granted, but a lot of people associate movie stars with, if you're a movie star, you could be any one of these. And we did walk into a drugstore on Newbury Street. He wanted to buy some gum. We went in there, and the guy the older guy who sold the gum, and he went, "Whoa, Burt! Oh my God!" It's because there's one thing in L.A. for Burt Lancaster, another thing in Newbury Street in Boston, during the day, and it was great. Great guy.
I hope you'll tell the story of going in and buying some gum in New York City, but not until the end. Until the end. Okay.
What a story.
I speaking of that, Eli Wallach told me this story based on what Arthur just said. He's walking along the street. A woman comes up to him and goes, "Oh my God, it's Marty Balsam." He goes, "No, I'm not Marty Balsam." She says, E.G. Marshall. And she says, No, I'm not E.G. Marshall. So, Jack Warden? He says, "No." She says, "Well, who are you?" He says, "Well, I'm Eli Wallach." She goes, "Oh, my favorite."
Now, let me, not to top this, but I'm walking with a buddy of mine who I don't know if you know the name, but you know the face for sure. Richie Bacalian. We're walking in Marina del Rey, and he had if you look at Dickie Bacalian's face, you'll know him instantly as everybody else does. He was in a lot of movies, supporting actor. And a guy comes running up to Dick as we're walking. He says, "I know you. You are you." And that was that.
The last one on this account was our recent guest, Renee Taylor, who we were walking together on Broadway, and a woman came up and said, "Didn't you used to be Renee Taylor?" And she said, "I still am."
Yeah, great.
So, Mike, do you have an early sports movie themed reference?
Oh, of course, of course. For me, I remember in school, I was probably only in second or third grade, and they showed the movie Brian's Song to us in school.
Ooh.
And such a depressing movie for them.
Did you cry, Mike?
No, of course not. No, never. Oh,
beautiful story.
Oh, it's a wonderful story. I had a tear or two. And it was interesting because he was such a powerful inspiration for Gale Sayers. And it was the way they tied it in. And it was James Caan and Billy D. Williams.
Was that Jimmy Caan before Godfather?
Yeah, because this was 71. This was right before, just before Godfather.
Yeah.
So, and it had a great cast, and it was, I've watched it multiple times since, and
a great song.
Exactly, and it was just amazing to
that was
watch that for the
great piece of music that became a big hit record at the time. I want to say on the subject of sports themed movies, the genre of sports movies is rich with super great films.
Before you mention some other titles, let me give you my first movie.
Sorry, sure.
No worries. I went to the Stadium Theater, Fox West Coast Stadium, in about 1956, and I saw a movie called Rudy's Bump. And I don't think anybody on the planet ever remembers an RKO title from 54 called Rudy's Bump. Rudy's Bump is about a kid, probably 12 years old, who develops an odd bump in his arm. Nobody can explain it, but basically what happens is he becomes a professional baseball pitcher. Now, if the idea sounds familiar, 1993, there was a movie called Rookie of the Year about a kid who breaks his arm, and when it heals back, he becomes a professional baseball pitcher. And that was I remember it because it all is about the Chicago Cubs, my favorite team. But Rudy's Bump was an actual movie, and it featured the Brooklyn Dodgers. If you watch the movie today, you'll see members of the Brooklyn Dodgers in that movie.
Steve, is that Roogis? Rookies? I never heard of that movie. But there was also a movie which featured the Giants in the early 1950s, and I don't know what the heck the name of that movie was. But you see Leo DeRocher, you see a lot of the players. I never heard of Rudy's Bump. There was one of the most fun sports movies of all time. It was called It Happens Every Spring with Ray Milland. Do we all remember that, guys?
Yes, he develops a formula for a substance that the bat can't touch the ball. Is that the case?
That's right. Norman Levy wanted to remake that movie at Columbia, and it didn't happen. But what a fun movie that was allergic. The substance, as a chemist that he develops, when it gets near wood, it jumps. So this guy would just throw these meatball pitches right down the middle of the plate, and the hitter would swing, and the ball would jump over the bat. So that was a fun movie, a B movie, if you will.
And another one like that, Arth, was Angels in the Outfield.
Loved it. Paul Douglas, sure.
Yeah.
But I want to say here about sports movies. Every genre has its certain great movies. Westerns, Red River, The Stagecoach. I mean, there's great movies in every genre. Sports movies, just boxing alone. You have Raging Bull. Steve, I want to put you to the test later and see if you can do some dialogue from Paul Schrader. Just kidding. It ain't Shakespeare, But, that great little scene where he's trying to fix the TV set. And he says to his brother, I'll leave it for later. the Rocky comes out of boxing. Body and Soul, John Garfield, were the iconic line. Julian, what is the iconic line from Body and Soul?
I don't know, but I like the song.
At the end of the movie, Garfield walks out and says, the guy threatens to kill him. He says, what are you going to do, kill me? Everybody dies.
Yeah.
From Body and Soul. The Champion with Kirk Douglas. These are great movies.
And there are more. The setup. And I'll tell you a very well-known movie in boxing. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it, called Fat City. Fat City starred Stacy Keach, directed by John Huston, who himself was a boxer.
Yeah.
John Huston, in his early years, was a boxer and fought a lot, in fact. But Fat City, if you've never seen it, is one of the most authentic and tough boxing movies ever made. Back to you, Arthur.
I heard of it, yes. Well, if you go over every one of the sports, I just use boxing as an example. Look at baseball. Great movies from baseball. There are some bad movies in all of these sports, but not bad movies, but just movies that aren't great. But in baseball, you have The Natural, which is, to me, one of the great movies, be in my top 50 probably. Field of Dreams, Moneyball, which is written by Aaron Sorkin and Steve Zalian. Moneyball, they took a book that was impossible to make, but those two guys figured out a way to make it happen. Brad Pitt, incredible, terrific motion picture. And then there was a very sentimental thing, but it was so great and still is, called Pride of the Yankees from the early 40s about Lou Gehrig with Gary Cooper, a classic of its type. I don't know, you consider it a great all-time movie, but it's certainly make you cry and get a great emotion out of you. But again, there's so many great movies with sports themes. There's The Hustler. There's, as I mentioned, Rocky, of course. There's horse racing. You've got Black Stallion, as an example. Seabiscuit with Jeff Bridges. National Velvet stands as a great movie with Mickey Rooney and Elizabeth Taylor. So sports are a rich source for really great films. Slapshot in Hockey. I would consider that a great movie for what it was. There was a little boxing movie called Requiem for a Heavyweight. Julian, can you talk about that?
Well, yeah, it was first of all, it was a television movie originally on TV. In those days, they often would take movies from television and make them into movies, like Marty, for example. Marty, we talked about Lancaster. Hecht, Hild, and Lancaster produced that movie, and it won the Academy Award, but from television. And yeah, Requiem for a Heavyweight was made on television. I think I'm not sure I'm mixing this up, but I think it was on TV. Jack Palance, and in the movie Anthony Quinn.
That's correct. From a script by Rod Serling.
Yeah, spent time with Rod Serling, and it was really very nice in London. We were together and spent a lot of time together. I liked him very, very much. But yes, Arthur, that was a very good film. And going back to baseball, do you guys remember, and I know Arthur will, Fear Strikes Out?
Of course. Terrible.
Anthony Perkins.
Right. And about Jimmy Pearsall from Boston. Yeah. Boston Red Sox.
Tremendous, great, true story that Anthony Perkins, who just could not look like a ball player. He threw the ball like a girl. It was hopeless. Now that you can never get away with that today. I mean,
you know who threw a ball like a girl, Arthur? Gina Davis in A League of Their Own.
Well, she's a girl, right? Good movie.
Good movie, and it's funny because she plays the catcher on I guess they're the Peaches, and she's terrific. And I don't think that was her. They said that she couldn't throw worth a lick, but I think she probably had a great stunt double. But that's also a really fun movie.
Yeah, well, the Pearsall story. Carl Malden was great in the film. Tony Perkins really wasn't. He was just miscast, but he was a star at the time, and they used him. But Jimmy Pearsall was one of the greatest defensive outfielders that ever lived. And the story, he was just pushed so hard by his father, he went nuts. And that's what happened to Jimmy Pearsall. So from the acting standpoint, Anthony Perkins, very good actor. but he was totally miscast in that movie because he just wasn't an athlete, certainly not a ball player. Casting is today again. If you're going to do a sports movie, you better look like you're real, and that's true of whatever the current films are. But years ago, because Gary Cooper really in Pride of the Yankees was definitely not a ball player, but he got away with it. And did we all see Pride of the Yankees?
Well, I did. I certainly did. Yeah,
of course.
Yeah,
sure, of course. It's a staple. It's a staple. Getting back to Rocky, Rocky became the best picture of 1976, beating out such titles as Network and All the President's Men. But talk about a movie that completely captured the American favor. I mean, that movie, which is a movie that United Artists didn't care for at all. The executives at UA barely gave John Avildsen, the director, enough money to make it. And it was a very low-budgeted movie. And it starred Sylvester Stallone, as we know, who had refused to sell the script unless he could star in it. He held them up for that. This is a guy who had no money. I think he had to sell it.
He was living in a cold water flat on the Lower East Side, working for a company I worked for as an usher. He was an usher at the Baronet and Coronet Theater in New York. And they wanted Jimmy Caan. Jimmy Caan, Winkler, Chartoff, they all wanted Jimmy Caan to play it, and he turned down hundreds of thousands of dollars. He would not be bought out.
Turned it down when he was busted, which is fantastic. At the same time, he was perfect for the role. He knew he was perfect for the role. He was perfect.
It coincided with the fact that America was celebrating that year its bicentennial, 1976.
Right.
So there was a whole patriotic fervor about the show. Casting was perfect. They cast Carl Weathers to play Apollo Creed, who was not a boxer. He was a football player. But Avildsen turned him into a very effective boxer. He had Talia Shire at the beginning of her career. It's a really a wonderful movie. And
well, it is, Steve. I want to mention too that we're talking about Stallone. He didn't make money out of the movie. That movie was a huge success, but he just didn't make much money out of it. And a couple of years later, when he had Rocky II, which was also great, I'll never forget being at a Show West convention in Las Vegas and seeing Stallone schlepping around with a can of film, which was his so-called sizzle reel for Rocky II. And he was just walking around the crowd like, it was normal. But here he was 2 years later. He didn't score on that first movie in terms of money. He certainly got the reputation. And I think after Rocky II, he made Fist, which just didn't work at all. And but he's come back. One of the great movie stars of all time, Stallone.
Oh yeah, I mean,
consider what this guy's done. It's really unbelievable.
Oh, his two franchises, Rocky and Rambo, really scored. But I heard recently that he does not own the Apollo Creed side of it for some reason. I think there's a big battle between him and Irwin Winkler about that.
Yes, there is, but Winkler does own it because he produced it and he put the thing together. He produced Rocky, one of the great movies of all time, as you say.
I would like to just say one quick thing. We always talk about in our business how important word of mouth is, more important than advertising, more important than anything. I'm walking down Broadway and a friend of mine comes up to me, literally grabs me and says, "Have you seen Rocky?" And I knew a kid from the Bronx named Rocky Cohn. I said, "You know Rocky Cohn?" He says, No, there's a movie. It's coming out. It's called Rocky. You've got to see it. I said, okay, but I'm not kidding. He's not just talking. He's holding on to me and shaking me. That's what I call word of mouth.
Wow.
That's pretty impressive. Yeah, most people don't realize that Stallone based his story a little bit on the boxer who fought Ali. Forgetting his name, but there was a boxer who was given an opportunity to fight the champ and did very well. And that's, I think his name was Jerry something.
Jerry, yes, big Irish guy.
Yeah, and who held his own in the ring, and I think that's what inspired Stallone, who apparently wrote the first screenplay, first draft over a weekend. I mean, it was just a huge stream of consciousness. There's just some wonderful acting in that. I remember vividly Stallone punching the meat in his in Natalia Shire's brother's meat locker.
It had a nice cast in the movie. You know, who was the actor, Steve, who played the promoter in the first Rocky?
Thayer David.
Whoa, good one.
Thayer David, and I always remember Thayer David as the bad guy in one of the great fantasy adventure films, Journey to the Center of the Earth.
Yeah, he was distinct.
One of the great ones.
But how about the ending of Rocky? Has there ever been a more upbeat, uplifting, wonderful moment in film than when she comes running into the ring? Yo, Adrian, you know.
You watch those scenes carefully, and I interviewed a number of the crew for a 40th anniversary issue of Cinema Retro on the 40th anniversary of Rocky, and Avildsen had trouble getting extras for the sports arena in downtown Los Angeles, so they had to move people around a lot. There were very few people in that actual basketball hockey stadium, so they had some deep challenges, and they did really well. We used in the movie Price of Glory with Jimmy Smits the same technique that they all used, and unbeknownst to me, but if your eye doesn't scan it, you don't see it. That most of you don't have real people in the stands of these sports things. There's these dummy things. They're plastic or cardboard people. They're not people. They're cardboards. You know, figures of human beings. And they have them by the hundreds. So if you look closely, you'll see it in almost every sports movie. And they did it in Rocky, and we did it in the Aragon Center or something, the Olympia in L.A. But I think we must have had 1,000 of those things. They don't cost much, but you know, if your eye doesn't, and you don't have to feed them.
No, and want to talk about also sports themed movies. How about The Hustler? With Paul Newman. That's a great movie. How
about The Hustler with George C. Scott?
With George and Murray Hamilton.
And our boy himself, Jackie Gleason.
And how about don't forget Myron McCormick.
And don't forget Piper Laurie.
Yeah. And who directed it?
Robert Rossen.
Bob Rossen, yeah.
Bob Rossen, who just did a beautiful job on that movie. And I thought that the sequel, many, 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 many years later, The Color of Money, directed by Scorsese, was also very good.
Very good film. Tom Cruise couldn't have been better. Let's go back to baseball for a second, guys. Where do you put Bull Durham? Because to me, it's one of the great movies.
Oh, I certainly enjoyed it. And it was a great cast. And Susan was never more desirable.
Boy.
I mean, my golly. And, but, you know, we talk baseball, we've talked boxing, but I loved a track movie called Chariots of Fire.
Oh, boy.
I just thought that came together with everything going for it, including, as Steve often points out, the music. Oh, my golly, the music on that, besides everything else. What a terrific movie.
Vangelis, who I think just passed away, if I'm not mistaken.
But there you go again. You see, you were talking about the genre of sports, and somehow at first, glance, a person would say, sports movie, sure. But in the sports genre, there are these great movies. Chariots of Fire is certainly one of them.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of them, more so than you think.
One of the ones I discovered on late night cable one year, I'd never seen it theatrically, was North Dallas 40, which has come to be one of my favorite films. I'm a big fan of Nick Nolte's character. This was based on a very popular novel by Peter Gent. Peter Gent was actually a wide receiver with the Dallas Cowboys, and he put together a novel inspired by the actual Dallas Cowboys. Of course, when they decided to make the movie, they did what the book does. They changed the name to the North Dallas Bulls. So it's not really
Mac Davis in that?
Mac Davis played a character that, according to my research, Peter Gent based on Dandy Don Meredith, who, of course, we remember for hosting with Howard Cosell Monday Night Football. B.A. Struthers, who was acted the coach, played by that wonderful character actor G.D. Spradlin, was based on Tom Landry, and Phil Elliott, who's the wide receiver, is actually based on the author Peter Gent. So there was some interesting parallels, but it's a very haunting movie, and it's a very big attack on professional football, on how they get players, to come back quickly from injuries by shooting them up with drugs. And that was a big part of that story.
Yeah. Well, football doesn't have that many great movies, but that's probably one of them that would get as close as possible. There are two movies I want to bring up for all of us that didn't do that well at the box office, but two of the most popular movies in the afterlife of all time. One is called Hoosiers, basketball, and the other one is called Rudy. Who didn't love Rudy if you saw it? But played big time on television and video and VHS and whatever these things were. But I love both those films. How do you guys feel about it?
Well, Hoosiers was terrific for me. And I think that one of the great actors of all time in America is Gene Hackman. When you look at that man's work and you look at the varied roles he played, it's not, we talk about typecasting, and there are people who pretty much get typecast. Gene Hackman could do almost anything. He just was a sensational actor. And one of the few who was a star, said, I'm done with it, and never came back. He's painting in Arizona or New Mexico, but he's done with it.
Yeah, he's done with it. Apparently, David Onspaugh, who directed Hoosiers, was just so excited to get Gene Hackman for the role of the coach. And apparently, the minute Gene Hackman came to this set, he was a nightmare. I don't know what it was, but there was something that made Gene Hackman very unhappy on that project. And throughout the whole film, as Onspaugh relates, he just hated every minute of it. And Onspaugh nearly had a nervous breakdown keeping him in tune. In fact, he said at the end of production, he predicted I think he said it to Dennis Hopper, who plays his friend in the movie, that we'll be lucky to have careers after this. Is going to be one of the biggest bombs ever. And was he wrong or what?
Well, but at the box office, it wasn't a big hit. It became a big movie on television. And you talk about word of mouth. For some reason it just didn't click big time in box office. It did well, okay, not great. But everybody in that movie, Barbara Hershey, couldn't have been more perfect. Hackman was perfect. Onspaugh was perfect because everything he directed in that film, the exteriors were just, he took it back to 1951 or whatever it was.
And then and once again, music.
Music, great. And tell me who was really wonderful in that movie was, the big hulking guy who was the principal of the school who brought him in. He was a country western star of sorts. Do you have that cast there, Steve? It wasn't Conway Twitty, but it was something like that.
We'll look it up.
Well, while Steve's looking it up,
yeah,
let's talk about a little movie called The Bingo Long Traveling All-Stars and Motor Kings. Here's a movie that you would think in those days of whenever it was, the 70s or 80s. When was it? Do you guys remember what year? I don't actually.
My guess is it was in the early 80s, guessing.
And here you've got James Earl Jones, and you got Billy D. Williams, and you got Richard Pryor before he really exploded, but he was known. And this is a terrific movie that's based pretty much on a lot of facts about these gentlemen in what was called the Negro Baseball League, and how they traveled around and what they did and how they played ball. And Satchel Paige was, I think, one of the guys they based it on. But it was a terrific movie. It was directed by John Badham, and it was produced by Berry Gordy. It was produced by Motown.
Yeah.
So it was a kind of an interesting kind of a pedigree of a lot of very, very prominent people. And I worked with John Badham when ostensibly I was in charge of the shooting of Saturday Night Fever for Paramount. And we were shooting in New York. And I went down to John and I was on the set. And my entire contribution to the movie was to call him over and remind him that we had to play television. So he had to also shoot a scene, if he could, without all the cursing. That was my entire, what would we call it? Let's say contribution to the film. But Bingo Long was a terrific movie. I looked it up. They made it for $9 million, and they did over $33 million.
Did they really? Yeah.
That's
well, the history,
movie.
Julian, if you take the history of the Negro Leagues, of which Bingo Long is spawned from, where these Negro ball players were not allowed in those days to play in the big leagues until Jackie Robinson. By the way, another good movie was 42, as was 61 that Billy Crystal did. But if you take those players in the Negro Leagues and put them together as an all-star team, they probably could have beaten any team in the major leagues in those days. They had Josh Gibson, probably the greatest catcher of all time. Right. Satchel Paige, arguably the greatest pitcher of all time, certainly would be in the top 10 of any bit. And so many of these great players, where Willie Mays came from, not much longer, 1948, 49, he got into the Negro Leagues. But Bingo Long was one of a terrific movie for what it was, for where it came out of. Steve, did you get that guy's name?
Seb Woolley.
He was great.
Didn't he have a song too?
Yes, he was a country western singer.
Well, his famous song was "The Purple People Eater."
Oh my God,
that's it. The Purple. Right.
Oh my God, that's pretty funny, actually.
It was interesting to me that in the current climate, let's say, because many of the times we're going back, I wouldn't say it's exactly current, but it introduced a beautiful actress to most of us. Was Tanya? Which was I thought a well-made movie.
Yeah,
and Margot Robbie, of course, showed that how beautiful and how talented she is in that.
What a story that was, huh?
Unbelievable.
Sure.
I had optioned the rights to a book called The Life Story of Mickey Mantle, back in about 1990. I was a close friend with Herb Gluck, who wrote it, and lived with Mickey for like 6 months to write this book. Great book. That was preceded by he had written In Person with Jerry Lewis. It's a whole other story of the real Jerry Lewis. But that was a hit book. And so he then did the Mick. I optioned the rights and got to meet Mickey at his restaurant in New York opposite Central Park. Is that 59th Street, Julian?
Yep, 59th, right across from those trees.
Right.
Yeah.
And I took a walk with Mickey after we met. We had lunch at his place, which was very crowded. And we walked down to 57th Street. And there too was like the Burt Lancaster walk or the Bill Holden walk. Walking in the streets in 1990 with Mickey Mantle was incredible. Cabs honking horns. Hey, Mick, his whole life. I said, is this it? All the time, wherever he goes.
You
really should have a show called Arthur's Walk of Fame.
Arthur's Walk of Fame, right? So
I've got the rolling equivalent of that. But Arthur, finish your story.
Anyhow, so I go up to CAA with these rights, with this option, and bring along, of course, Mickey's attorney. I won't mention his name, and his daughter. And we had a meeting, whatever. As we're leaving, your buddy, Julian, Barbara Streisand, is coming into CAA down below and by the Peninsula Hotel. And waiting at the elevator, there were like 10 agents to welcome her, to bring her up to see Mike Ovitz, giving her the special treatment that she deserved, And as we're leaving this meeting, the attorney's daughter, heavyset girl, nice girl, took a look at this and go, oh my God, it's Barbara Streisand. I can't believe it. 4 days later, I get a call from the attorney. My daughter wants to produce the movie. She wants to be involved with Mickey Mantle. That's a whole other story. But I will say this about Mickey Mantle. In 61, which Billy Crystal did, He had the Maris guy pretty good. Mantle, it was fair. The thing about Mickey Mantle was he may not have been the greatest player of all time, but he was the greatest looking player of all time. In uniform, nobody wore number 7 like Mickey Mantle. And that was the whole concept of what that movie would have been, was to dolly in on that look, that golden boy. He was classic. No one quite like him. Billy Crystal, anybody who knew Bob Costas, Crystal, whoever saw Mantle in his prime, understood, if you were a baseball fan, as I am, and they are, the specialty of watching him just strike out. He was something else to see, and remains that way. Probably the best looking player on field in uniform I've ever seen. Ted Williams close. Anyway.
Going back to Rocky a little bit, I was involved with a company run by Jack Schwartzman, who was a prominent producer married to Talia Shire. And Jack produced a sports-themed movie called Rad that TriStar released in the late 80s. And it was about BMX bicycle racing. So we had things in this movie that were unusual, that they would dance these bicycles in an interesting way. In fact, they went to a dance club on their bicycles, and they had dancing bicycles. So we thought we would introduce this in a public event. So that year for the Hollywood Christmas parade, we got Talia Shire in a car and the dancing bicycles around her. So I had my first experience with what it's like to sit in a car in a nighttime parade. Because, we all remember seeing the lights and the excitement of being interviewed on camera in front of all those lights. But once you leave the lights, you drive around the Hollywood area and it's completely dark. And there are people and you're completely unprotected.
And you got mugged.
No, we didn't get mugged. But every so often we'd hear, "Yo, Adrian! Yo, Adrian!"
Of course.
Well, you talk about the bikes, and I think of a movie that was such a sleeper. It took 7 years to get made, called Breaking Away. You guys remember?
Oh, it's such a wonderful movie. It's like Hoosiers. It's like The Underdog.
Yeah, but unlike Hoosiers, it made money in its theatrical release. But 7 years, they kept getting turned down. They kept trying, but they finally got it made.
I can't imagine a movie taking 7 years to get made, Julian. I just can't imagine. Bob Costas is probably as good a sports announcer as there is. Some years ago, we just got out of a strike at the Writers Guild, and it looks like the SAG will end it too. Years ago, there was a strike in baseball in the early 90s, and I was a guest on a friend of mine. Kevin Kennedy used to manage the Red Sox on his radio show. And all I was saying was that it's very comparable to the movie business. The baseball business, the sports business is the movie business. You got stars, you got agents, you got franchise, what have you. And so it was kind of like a debate about it. And I hang up the phone on this call. And 10 minutes later, my phone rings. And hello, is this Arthur? Yes, it is. This is Bob Costas. I was driving around the streets in St. Louis, which is where he lives. And I heard that thing, and I just wanted to. We had into a 1 hour conversation, he and I, a debate of whether baseball and movies are similar in terms of the business. And he agreed with me at the end. He said, "You're right, Liz." And now you have in baseball the wealthiest union in the world. All of these players are multimillionaires. And Marvin Miller, a man who is not known by many, who negotiated that deal for them years and years ago, apropos to the striking the strikes that just took place, negotiated what they ought to kiss his forehead every day. The players. Isn't
the other person they need to kiss the forehead of is Curt Flood of the same?
Curt Flood and Marvin Miller, absolutely. Yeah, Marvin Miller and Curt Flood. They should both be in the Hall of Fame.
Yeah, for the first free agents. We were talking earlier about Moneyball being in a really effective baseball movie because it goes into the business of baseball. Recently, I saw a Kevin Costner film called Draft Day.
Yeah, good movie.
Good movie, and Draft Day is all about the business machinations of the football business. I thought that was a terrific movie. I really did.
Was, and about Draft Day and professional football. I think we need to mention, you mentioned Kevin Costner. You can't leave out Field of Dreams. Um, I knew Chuck Gordon, who was one of the producers, he and Larry of Field of Dreams, and was told the story of how difficult it was to get as Costner to do hey, Dad, you want to have a catch? He just thought it was too schmaltzy and he didn't want to do it. And so Chuck and Larry said to him, Kevin, look, do it. If you don't want to use it after it's done, we'll cut it out, whatever you want to do. Meantime, talk about a line that it evokes tears in anybody's eyes if you see that movie. But that's a classic film. Kevin Costner also made Tin Cup. He's a big sports guy, so he's perfect to do. And by the way, when we talked about Gary Cooper earlier and talked about Jimmy Pearsall or Anthony Perkins, the antithesis of that was Costner, who really could play ball. So when you saw him in Bull Durham and then Field of Dreams, he was totally believable.
And his third baseball film was, he did something called For the Love of the Game.
Not a bad movie with Kelly Preston. Not a bad movie. He also did a little movie called Tin Cup for Ron Shelton.
As the
golf movie.
Has the most frustrating sequence I've ever seen in a sports movie, where he's trying to hit that ball over the trees.
Yes.
And it keeps bouncing back. Crazy, crazy, crazy.
Speaking of golf movies, guys, what do you think of Caddyshack? Not as a great movie, but a great movie. I mean, that's a fun, Rodney Dangerfield.
Iconic, definitely.
One of the boxing movies that we've not mentioned, which I saw both on the stage and then launched in New York, was The Great White Hope, about Jack Johnson, starring James Earl Jones, in one of the best performances I've ever seen on screen and in person. Who
was the actress who played against him in the film?
Jane Alexander.
Yes, sir. Who was also in All the President's Men.
That's right.
Yeah.
And what was so interesting to me, I was so moved by the play that when James Earl Jones left the play, they brought in a guy I never heard of to take over. I wonder if you guys could guess who it is. Big, husky.
Denzel Washington?
No, bigger, huskier. Yaphet Kotto.
Oh, boy.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that was the first time I'd ever heard of him or seen him, and he was great. He's also great in that Midnight Run with Charles Grodin as the hero.
Well, I'll give you a great one, Julian. We saw James Earl Jones in The Great White Hope in Boston in the show, and my first wife, my ex-wife, and I was sitting in like the first row, getting special seats, and he sweated like crazy. And at one point, he just moves his head real fast, and his sweat goes all over my ex-wife. What a thrill! It was hysterical.
Speaking of boxing, another film which just spawned a number of remakes, but Here Comes Mr. Jordan, 1941, with Robert Montgomery and Claude Rains, and just a great cast. And obviously,
gave birth to Heaven Can Wait.
Gave birth to Heaven Can. And now I didn't realize that Here Comes Mr. Jordan was based on a play called Heaven Can Wait, which was considered a lesser play. But it became Here Comes Mr. Jordan, and then, of course, became Heaven Can Wait with Warren Beatty when they changed the motif from boxing to football. Interestingly, in Here Comes Mr. Jordan, James Gleason, the wonderful character actor, won the Oscar that year for Best Supporting Actor. When the movie was remade, Jack Warden, I'm not sure if he won, but he was nominated for. Actually, no, it was Gleason was nominated and didn't win, and then Jack Warden was nominated for Best Supporting Actor, playing the same character in Heaven Can Wait.
Jack Warden was great in absolutely everything he did.
Everything.
12 Angry Men. Jack Warden was out, and in the thing with Clark Gable and Don Rickles. The submarine picture. Warden was
Run Silent, Run Deep.
Run Silent, Deep,
it's funny you should mention that because Steve Mitchell and I just did the Blu-ray commentary track for the Blu-ray release of Run Silent, Run Deep. By the way, Jack Warden's real name was John Lebzetter. He changed his name. Warden was his middle name.
He made
You
a
remember
good.
the line, Steve, from the bathroom scene when he's talking about selling marmalade or something like that?
And from what movie?
From 12 Angry Men.
Oh, I don't remember that
Jack
part.
Warden.
But let's get back to what Arthur said. Warren Beatty had played football in high school, so he could throw a ball, as you could see in that. Now, I'll tell you what I think is a very interesting story. We'll see if anyone else thinks so. Warren Beatty wanted one person only to play the Claude Rains role, and he did everything to get him. Everything, and he would have been incredible.
Oh.
And that was Cary Grant.
Oh,
Cary Grant. And he tried every single trick in the book. And he can be very persuasive, as we all know. But no, he didn't get that. Elaine May wrote the screenplay. There was a movie with Don Amici called Heaven Can Wait. Nothing to do with either Here Comes Mr. Jordan or the remake. But a wonderful movie. I loved it. And
hey, Julian, what about the great line of Charlie Grodin, who is hiding in the room?
Behind the curtain.
It's such a simple line, but it's hysterical. What was the line?
Yes, Mr. Farnsworth.
Yes, that was it. That's all he had.
And Diane Cannon, they both were hysterical together.
I think Diane was nominated for the Academy Award, I think, for Best Supporting Actor. So,
the movie has a little bit of a cheat, though. Warren Beatty's character wants to go to the Super Bowl, and there's some resistance to hiring him, a billionaire, as a quarterback. So he decides to buy the team. And I think the thing in the movie is, which upsets the finance guys, because I think he buys the movie for $67 million and its book value is 18. But the funny thing is, and we know today that if you're going to buy a professional sports franchise, it has to be approved by every other team in the league before that can happen. So they had a little bit of a cheat there.
Sports franchises, much like movies, are worldwide now because of the ability to technology to televise these things all over the world. And if a team gets one ball player, let's say from Australia, it opens up the Australian market to not only televising the games for these rights, but to sell the T-shirts and the helmets and the hats and what have you. So it's a worldwide business, sports. No team more than the Yankees benefits from that because they're worldwide. Dallas Cowboys too.
Now, one sport that hasn't done that well in film, but there's some funny ones. I saw recently a movie called Kingpin with Bill Murray, and Woody Harrelson plays the lead character, and it's a very, very funny movie. Bowling is an unusual motif. I have a particular interest because whereas you guys probably were more involved in traditional sports when you were kids, my thing was bowling. Saturdays and Mondays for 10 or 15 years, I was at the bowling alley, and I always enjoyed the sport.
While you mentioned Woody Harrelson, I suppose we've all seen a little movie called White Men Can't Jump because that is a great film.
Yes.
We all agree?
Oh, yeah.
So much fun.
A lot of fun.
Basketball has spawned a few good ones. There was one, an odd one that was, I don't think it did very well, called The Fish That Saved Pittsburgh. That was about basketball.
I remember the movie. How about Jerry Maguire? That's a sports movie.
I'll tell you a little black and white movie starring Dane Clark as Abe Saperstein.
Ooh, Harlem Globetrotters.
It's called Go Man Go.
Great one. Yeah.
Go.
Made for $1.42.
Very cheap, but boy, when you watch Goose Tatum dunk, you can really say that's a basketball player.
Did you ever see the Harlem Globetrotters in person?
I sure did. I was a huge fan. Unbelievable. They were unbelievable.
Yeah.
Did the Washington Generals ever beat them?
No.
Never. They weren't allowed to, Steve.
There's a team now touring, an amateur team called the Savannah Bananas. They are the Harlem Globetrotters of baseball. They make the game fun. They play in 2 hours, so it can only last 2 hours. Foul balls that are caught in the stands are an out. And they are touring with a team that's similar to the Washington Generals, except they play for real. and they win some games. But that's now you're going to hear a lot about the Savannah Bananas. I promise.
Don't tell Major League Baseball that balls that land in the stands are an out, because they might change that rule, because they're always thinking of new ways to.
But no. They own the baseball company now, Steve. That's why they give them away so much. A movie we left out that we should talk briefly about, great little movie, was The Harder They Fall with Humphrey Bogart.
Yeah, his last movie. That was the last movie Bogart ever made.
Was Steiger in that?
Yes, he is. And he is emoting like he can do.
Yeah.
Well, I guess there's a little sports motif, not really an On the Waterfront, because Marlon Brando is an ex-boxer.
Yeah.
There's that famous scene in the cab. I could have been a contender.
Steve, can you give us a little quote of the line from Raging Bull when De Niro is trying to fix his TV set and Joe Pesci's sitting on the sofa?
I don't know.
Could you just?
I wish I could
get away with
Shakespeare. It's not Shakespeare, but
I wish I could.
It's Paul Schrader. It's Paul Schrader. The reason I bring it up is it's not so much the line, which is like wow. It's he's fixing with the TV set. Pesci's on the sofa, and it's with the ease of the way De Niro delivers that line. It was like, so, pass the coffee. The line, of course,
De Niro was also in another sports-themed movie very early in his career called Bang the Drum Slowly.
Yeah. I was not a fan of that movie for some reason.
The one other movie I wanted to mention, which blends genres, is World War II and sports, a soccer movie called Victory.
Yeah.
Stallone and Pele. I think it's a crazy cast. I don't think it was that successful. Sometimes you can't blend the genres. Well, we're coming to the end of this. This has been a great show about sports. I think we all love sports, and we all love movies, and we all love sports movies. Take a moment to remind everybody, if you're interested in our show but you have any questions or suggestions, you should contact us via email at Tales from Hollywoodland. That's all one word, talesfromhollywoodland@gmail.com. And that will get you right to us. And hey, if you've made it this far into our show, why don't you subscribe? It's free, and we are available on Apple, Amazon, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. We would really appreciate it, and please don't hesitate to recommend us to your friends, family, neighbors. We just love the attention. Right, guys?
Yes. And we won't do that line from Raging Bull. Is that right, Steve? We won't do it?
You caught me at the quick. This is one movie I don't know encyclopedically. I could probably give you some good Rocky lines, but I'm in trouble when it comes to Raging Bull.
Julian, you know the line I'm talking about?
Absolutely not, but I want to thank Mike for those balloons.
Mike, thank you for those balloons. Mike Faber, of course, is our wonderful producer who puts all this together and allows us to come into your homes or your cars or your airplanes, wherever you're listening.
Have a good week, everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Take care.